So I hope everybody has digested and recovered from the ending of For Those In Peril. Please join me in welcoming Paul Wright and George MacKay, the director and star of For Those In Peril. We're going to ask a few questions and then obviously hand over to you guys. I'm sure there will be questions from the floor as well. And then we have questions from Twitter and Facebook as well. Paul, I mean, let's get things started. I want to just find out to begin with how this story took shape. I mean, what was that first idea which set you rolling?
I think I grew up in a similar village in the east coast of Scotland, so I think it was always, the sea was always part of everyday life, and also stories from the sea, like kind of real and myths from the sea. So I think it was the idea of taking one of these myths and playing with it in a very real world and seeing how that would happen. But I think one of the big starting places of it was having. It was like the single image, which towards the end of the film, it's okay. Is it? I guess to say it as if people have seen it.
Oh, I think you have to.
Yeah. So it was like the idea of initially it was like a boy with fish skills, as a starting place, and then it was almost how could that come to be, and then it was almost working backwards from that is almost like a final image, and so that was. The very first starting place for it. That was like the one line written on a scrapbook somewhere. Yeah.
I mean, the myth of the devil in the sea, I mean, that sounds like something which must have been plucked from reality, or was that just plucked from the inside of your head?
It was kind of a mixture of 2 or 3 different myths, like I think all over Europe, I think on the from fishing villages, they have their own variations of these myths and stuff. So it was kind of tailoring one specifically for the film, so it wasn't a particular myth, but yeah. It gave it that myth, it becomes all or nothing, and it becomes, heaven on earth, or, hell forever, and there was something in that, I think, that kind of felt it kind of elevated the stakes for the main character.
I mean, you've touched on this a little bit already, but I wanted to ask sort of how much autobiography there was in the film, and how much of, I suppose it's an obvious question, but how much of you there is in Aaron?
God.
Sorry, it was
always going to happen. It's interesting. I think I need some therapy after making this film, from a few of the... but, I lost... Well, in my own life, I lost my father when I was fairly young. I was 15, and I think it was, the first time I really had to deal with that kind of grief. And I think at that age as well, there was that kind of, confusion, I suppose, obviously understanding what had happened, but not really accepting it, or not accepting the finality of death. And it was I don't even know if it mattered the age I was at, because it's obviously such a big. But again, with that, it felt like when death was present, that life as well became a little bit more vivid, and I think that was the idea with the film, and also it was obviously a dark couple of years for me when that happened, and just that, I don't know, maybe the daydreaming about a impossible reunion, so that part for sure has something inside me, that came through in the film, I think. But it wasn't totally conscious, actually. It wasn't. It's just almost after you finish writing the film, you're
that's what I've done.
Exactly. Yeah. It wasn't. Oh, I'm going to, confront my grief over my dead father. That wasn't the starting place, but it kind of it came through, obviously. Sorry, Josh.
No, but George, I will be bringing you in any second. I just wondered, as a filmmaker, though, obviously you made a series of shorts beforehand, and I wondered to what extent you were kind of picking up the threads that maybe you developed in those shorts, or was For Those in Peril just a kind of clean slate for you as a filmmaker?
I think it certainly it has themes that pop up in some of my shorts, and also stylistically, I think it was, it was always the challenge of how to do a feature film, it's one thing doing the style of the film for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but to try and kind of maintain that energy for a feature-length film was the biggest challenge. But yeah, there are I think it's like the big love, death, and they seem to pop up in my shorts as well. And so whether we were making it for a couple of £100 and that, I did want to have quite a certain amount of ambition, even if it was just one person in a room, or I thought. So yeah, I think looking at the shorts, you can see hopefully a progression rather than a kind of an aping of it.
Sure. I mean, the sea is obviously kind of this huge element of the film. This elemental element, and it's this sort of a monster and a sanctuary at the same time. I mean, tell me a little bit about your personal relationship with the sea and your connection with the sea.
No, it's just what you're saying there. Like it can be the most beautiful, calm, and giving thing, and then and especially on the east coast of Scotland, it can kind of change like that, and it becomes like a real dangerous thing. And obviously with the sea, I think it felt right for the film that it's the one of the few remaining places on Earth that we don't know everything about it. So it has that kind of mystery, and it has it had that kind of the uncanny feel about it. And but yeah, like personally, we used to looking back at coming back from school and stuff. We used to, which was a scene in an early draft of the film, but it never made it to the end. But it was the idea that when the tide was right in, we'd run along like the rocks to get home and that. And it was, it was like very, we could have died pretty easily basically so it was timing each run to avoid the waves and that. And looking back, that was. Foolish. I wouldn't recommend that to the viewers of it.
It's funny you say that, because I think one of the things that's so striking about the film is, the kids feel so real because the kids are wild. Kids don't think about consequences, do they?
Yeah. No, but that was it. It was like growing up in like I say, a similar village, and that there was, you kind of did make your own entertainment, and we were as kids, we were outdoors kind of all day, just mucking around and stuff. And obviously it was pushing things a bit with the film and that kind of darkness, but I think there is that element of the kids kind of that was their playground almost, the whole of nature and stuff.
I mean, I suppose the two of the most sort of pivotal moments in preparing the ground for the film would be finding Aaron, but also finding a location. And before we talk about Aaron and bring George into the conversation, tell me a little bit about finding the village that we see there for Those in Peril.
Yeah, well, it was actually written with my home village in mind, and then when it came to filming it, it was for a few different reasons, but ultimately the village. I'd started writing it when I was living in London, so it was like I had it was like my memory of the village that we ended up filming, which was like 2 hours north, was more like the village I remember growing up in than the actual village I grew up in, weirdly. So we ended up filming there. But also, I think the big thing was, the biggest thing with the production itself was just the schedule, because the way I make films it's a lot of moments, and try to find these moments in fragments, but you've got to film all that, so it was, I think, what was it, like 250 scenes or something, and it became, like any big location move would have just killed us, so we found this village that it had everything we wanted within, it was really close by, and it was just, it made it doable all of a sudden, rather than, having to drive 3 hours to get to the next location and stuff, so it was all really quite compact. And
was there a kind of a timelessness that you were looking for with Village? Because it does feel like it's interesting. You say that it feels like what your village was like 20 years ago. Because it feels like a throwback. It feels like that village has been that way forever.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's what kind of and the fact it was still a working harbour, which the village I grew up in no longer is. So it's now kind of became a more I guess. Touristy, or it becomes about let's go and go to a nice part of the coast or whatever, and it's all been I guess rented, cleaned up a fair bit and stuff. Whereas with this village, because it being a working harbour and that, it still had that, like you say, kind of timeless quality, which I think was important. We didn't want to it could have as easily been set 20 years ago.
Sure. It's funny, isn't it? There's a massive difference between fishing villages and seaside villages, and that's what's come through there. That's not a tourist town at all. There's no tourists coming through there. let me talk to both of you a little bit about the casting. I mean, tell me how the casting came about, because originally what I heard was that you were thinking about street casting and just finding an unknown, finding a non-professional. I mean, is that true? And then, if so, how did you get to George?
Well, we had I guess the net was pretty open, like when we were originally casting, and we were working with Colleen, who's done a lot of stuff with Ken Loach and that, and that's, you know, that was one of her approaches she's well known for, you know, like getting and as it happened, we did use a lot of the locals and the kids from the village. But I think so we were open to that, and then we got Mr. George here. He sent in, what was it, like a self-taped audition, and then it was like, all right, actually, you know, like maybe this guy's good, and it became you know, this guy from London. It was like, all right, I wouldn't have thought that's the way we would have went with it, but I think George is so good, it became like, it would have been crazy not to kind of put him in, you know, to have him as Aaron, so that's kind of really.
And what's your version of that story, George?
Yeah, I sent in a tape, and then I was then got to meet Paul, and the second sort of audition, I guess, was when I met Paul. I prepared a couple, was told to prepare a few more scenes, and when I went in there to meet him, I was reading with another actress, and then kind of pretty quickly Paul said, you know, just don't worry about the lines too much, just use it more as a framework kind of thing. So it was nice. It was different in the sense that there was a lot of improvisation in the audition, which was great, and it was quite a long audition as well, like, which was lovely, because sometimes, you know, you're in and you're out and you're not too sure how it went, and you've kind of because it's all about the lines and such, you kind of go, no, well, I didn't say that, I didn't hit that full stop or whatever. Whereas, you know, Paul, we were talking before with someone, and there was, you know, like you said, I remember, like, really clear direction, but that was pretty open as well, and like the scene where he doesn't want Jane to go, and we were reading that, and he said, you know, just try and convince her, and then one time he said, all right, now do something to scare her, and stuff like that. You therefore you can kind of do anything within that, but you have a very clear sense of what you have to do. So it was great fun, and it was kind of, I've not really had an experience like that before, so yeah, it was wonderful, and then lucky enough got the part.
I mean, how collaborative was it between the two of you in kind of building up that character of Aaron? Because obviously, I mean, I imagine there was a certain amount of that character was on the page, I guess, but also so much of it, I guess, during shooting will have kind of evolved. So how much of that was the two of you working together, and how much of that was you as an actor kind of going off on your own journey?
I think, as you say, there's so much on the page already, and but what was lovely, it definitely felt like, I mean, for me, that was the most collaborative and closest I've ever been with, you know, with the director, and it was, we talked a lot about kind of somewhat plotting his journey, and it was also working with the other actors in rehearsals as well. We had a week's rehearsal, and it was getting to work with Kate Dickey, who played Kathy, and a lot of things she said, you know, really informed my like feelings on Aaron, and it was kind of about basically just working out what he believed was true, and kind of and making him given a real sort of rationale to what he was doing, and that it made complete sense to him, and within all the confusion, and then kind of letting all the other elements around that play against that, rather than try and do all of that yourself. Just be very clear in what he was thinking of doing, because he is so isolated. As long as he knew what he was doing, that's all I kind of had to worry about. And yeah, I mean, Paul talked a fair bit about that as we were going along.
Yeah, I mean, how did you find that process, Paul? Because obviously, it's for you, I guess, this is a character that you've carried around in your head for a long time. So then seeing him become flesh and blood.
Sure. Yeah. No, and again, like, just seeing, you know, that's the best thing about working with talented actors, you know, when they make it better than anything you could have thought. So that was great. But I think, as George said, like the rehearsal time, but also just having, I think it was like a day or 2 days, we just kind of, you know, went through the whole script scene by scene, and just, you know, it was even just giving it like a headline. It's like, that's what this scene is about, and that's what we're trying to achieve with this. And then, because you know yourself, you're filming so out of sequence, and it's all over, and so much of it was George on his own and stuff, and it would have been easy to kind of get quite lost in, oh, where are we now, and what's going, you know, so that it felt like that. It created a shorthand almost on the day, so it was, of course, there was still, you know, interaction between the two of us, but it felt like at least half the work had been done, and which is the way it needed to be, because the schedule was pretty tight, and we didn't have the time to be
like, what does this mean, and kind of this and that, like,
just do it, George.
Yeah. We did that already prior.
So no, that and for me that was key, like for every scene, just to have that one line of, right, if all else fails, as it often does during a shoot, that things can go wrong, and that's like, if we get the core of this scene, we'll be okay, and that was me and George kind of working together to get to that.
And also that, and when we were on set, is Paul's way of working was so so brilliant. From for myself, I'd not really had a work like that before. In the way that there's lots of scenes, obviously when he's on his own and kind of going to and from places, and times in the bedroom, and it's those moments in the bedroom, that they say there's a kind of image that that Paul was after, and or that we wanted to get, but weren't sure kind of necessarily, or at least I wasn't sure necessarily what it was immediately. But rather than do kind of 6 minute and a half goes at it and talk in between each one and sort of break the flow of it, we just kind of do 1 or 2 goes, but then run the camera for like 10 minutes. And that was a real sort of luxury for me, in the sense that that if the scene's going to be like roughly a minute long, then 9 minutes of what you're doing isn't going to be used, and so you can kind of do anything within that, and it makes you not so nervous. If right, I've only got a minute and a half to get something in this, so I won't try standing on my head, because that's ridiculous. But then when that's one of 9 minutes, you kind of go,
I'll stand on my head.
Just try stand on my head.
Stop standing on your head. Every scene.
It didn't make it in.
So that's what's on the DVD, is the extras are just all
trying to do really bad gymnastics. But yeah, so it was lovely. But then some of the time, not standing on your head, but something that you thought, you might probably wouldn't have tried beforehand. Actually, Paul encouraged that, and you go, okay, right then, I would do it.
But it became like a real relationship with the two of us, and also, obviously all the crew, but, Benny is the cinematographer and the camera, and it was like this kind of, like we knew that, we'd be taking 2 or 3 moments from that, and that would be this scene, like these 2 or 3 little fragments. And for Benny, it was, like he had that same kind of freedom, I suppose, that it was about trying to find these moments, and, so that was, it was a nice kind of, the 3 of us working that way.
Sure. It's an obvious question, I know, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, how much concern was there on both your parts, really, about George, about you playing Scottish? Because again, we've had, and I'm sure this can't have been the first time this has happened, just now we've met one of our colleagues from the BFI who was aghast that you weren't Scottish and you're actually a Londoner. So, how did you approach that? And Paul, were there any kind of moments of anxiety on your part on having this London boy come up?
Oh, aye, the new. No, it was I don't know, for you, like for me, like I was saying earlier, I think I wouldn't have thought I would have cast a guy from London in the film, but it was so good, it became like, and your accent was already, I don't know how much, or if that was just you, watching whatever, but his accent was kind of halfway there anyway, just even with the audition tape, and then we had a voice coach. You had a few sessions with that.
I had a voice coach before, and she helped sort of solidify it, making sure the sounds there, a couple of sounds that was, which would flag it up that it was an accent, and then she just kind of set me right on those, and it always helped being around Scottish voices all day. So yeah.
And George kept the accent up all day as well, which was like obviously in between takes and all that. So that was.
I was going to say, because it's incredibly impressive purely because as a non-actor you think, well, actually if that was me, I wouldn't be able to do that accent in the first place, but also I'd be so hung up about keeping it that I wouldn't be able to kind of to get that kind of emotional truth that you get in the character, because I'd just be thinking about my voice all the time.
Well, that was, I guess, the one reason for doing it all the time was on set, not necessarily like back at the hotel or anything like that, but it was just so I didn't have to think about it anymore. And I remember the first day going up to Paul and being like, just trying to say good morning, but I remember leaving. We were in this little sort of house down the street, and thought I had gone there, and I thought when I leave the house, I will do Scottish from then on, but trying to speak in English all that morning, and and then leaving the house and go, shit, right, from now on, if I don't say hello to Paul in Scottish, I'll just do English and only do it for the scenes. And having to go up to him and be like, although I'm doing my accent today. I didn't want to say it because you don't want to be a dick, basically.
I don't, and honestly, I tip my hat to you because the idea of doing a Scottish accent in front of lots of Scots, I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. It's like speaking French in front of French people. This is a nightmare.
Well, that was the thing. Is like, I didn't want to be. I thought, it's going to be really embarrassing when someone picks up and goes, "Why are you doing your accent the whole time?" Because then it would be like, well, clearly, it's an accent. So, but in the end, it worked the best because. I could forget about it, and also in the sense of being kind of obviously he doesn't talk a lot either. So I mean there was times where I'd be doing it in the daytime but wouldn't actually have to say anything, but it just kind of helped doing it because you've got to. I guess there's something without sounding too kind of dramatic. We weren't kind of in it all of the time, but it kind of helps you to kind of allows you to mess about a little bit in between, and then feel. Like you've still kind of got a bearing of what's going on.
Sure. I mean, the other aspect of the character, I guess, as well, which might be weird being a Londoner, is that this is a character who becomes an outcast in a small town, and small towns, particularly one that's as small as that, have this particular sort of atmosphere, that London just doesn't have. So, I mean, how easy or otherwise was it to connect with that sense of being enclosed in this very tight-knit little community?
I think you can find those communities in anywhere. Obviously, like as a whole, London is a ridiculously big, busy city, but that community can be school. That it's like a friendship group, and the whole thing, I guess, with that is that so much of it is in his own head. Obviously, he is ostracised by the community and everything, but it's about kind of it's all born out of the way he feels about in himself about what's going on, and I think everyone can relate to that in some ways, however apparent it's been, whether they actually get ostracised or they feel like they are, if they are or if they're not. You're always kind of worried about, it's like a first day at school or at a party and something, you can kind of, oh shit, and suddenly it's building up in your own head and that's what's happening. It's just in a much more, serious environment.
I mean, it makes me think, one of the things, I thought was so extraordinary about the film is that, you maintain Aaron's point of view throughout the entire film. We were seeing it through his eyes. Was that always your intention, Paul?
Yeah, I think it was about like getting a character, and we had the setup for the film, but then it was about like really getting into his bloodstream and exploring these different states of mind almost from this single character. So, which like I was speaking earlier about, to me is almost more like what real life is. You kind of. You remember stuff. You're doing something, and you're thinking ahead for the future and fearful, and it's these kind of. It isn't totally stopped, and you wake up and it was all a dream. It's like there is that kind of blurring, and I think film has that really unique potential that you can play. Obviously, you can play with that as well and blur these lines a bit, and so that was really exciting. And just to get. To go quite extreme with it, that we have this character, and because there's moments in the film, like it was always kind of said that for the ending or whatever to reach that kind of high, if you will, that we really needed to earn it, rather than just and then this happens at the end, and so it was about. We talked about it like there was a part in the film. Like 15 minutes before the ending, where it was like, which is it's a risky technique, but it was the idea that we wanted the audience to be like, that's enough, stop this now, like that. Okay. We don't want to see, we can take no more, or so that was like a goal almost, and then it kind of calmed down again, and it took on a different path, but yeah, it was the hope to kind of have this character study and go into these extreme contrasting places with them.
One more question about casting, which was I was wondering, to what extent you kind of built the cast around George, once he was there, because obviously because you're seeing everything through Aaron's point of view, the rest of the cast kind of orbit him. So when you were casting the film, did you follow that same process, which was that, you sort of secure Aaron and then you build the rest of the cast around, so Kate Dickie comes in afterwards, or was someone like Kate Dickie on much earlier than that?
I think with the likes of Kate and also Michael Smiley, like who I'd worked with before, like I think I'd had kind of one eye on them anyway, but then of course, it only became official once George was cast, because then we had the brother to think about, and then you had, it was that kind of dominoes thing and stuff like that. So once George was confirmed, then the rest of the things. But we already had good ideas who would be the rest of the family.
Well, specifically, actually, I was going to ask, it's Jordan Young, isn't it, who plays,
That's right,
who plays the brother, and it's such. I mean, that seems such interesting casting. I was going to ask you both about that, because actually, although you barely get any scenes together, you see these sort of fragments of flashbacks. To me, at least, anyway, I mean, you completely accepted these pair of boys as brothers, and there's something, they don't even physically look that similar. But there's something. So, was that something that was that kind of good luck, or was that something that you spotted at casting?
I think, Jordan was, as is George, we had the luxury of having, was it a day? I think we had a day of just fooling around with it. Like, I had lots of kind of half ideas, we could do a bit of this, do a bit of that. But just like, we were shooting on, was it High 8, I believe it was, so like High 8 camera, and we had a few tapes, and it was just like, just keep rolling. And I think Jordan and George, and Nicola was in a lot of these scenes as well, like, they had that real quality, like natural improv ability, and Jordan was really funny as well. But then, he could like that was the only shame of the film, that there was a lot of really funny Jordan and George stuff that we had it, and it was maybe not quite right. It was like brother kind of jokes and stuff, and so some of that, maybe that, I don't know if that'll
ever surface.
That would be nice, actually.
With George standing on his head, a little bit.
It's there.
So those scenes, were they mostly improvised, George?
Yeah. I mean, this day with the home video camera. I mean, we had I think a day or half day rehearsals where we kind of got to know each other. But it was funny, we did that, and then Jordan wasn't out again till sort of closer to the end. And it was just a real luxury of just playing about with the camera, really. And as Paul said, Paul kind of set us on our way, and we just kind of messed about, and it was great fun. I mean, it's like it was the best. It was just the best time, of just but like genuine, like it was so fun. Headstands. But like and it was great fun to just have the freedom to kind of be encouraged to kind of do as much as you want, really, and we had the time with it. And it was great.
And I think the casting with George, and I think with all the cast members, the one thing the main cast anyway they had in common was, which was important I think to the film, was they could turn. It was like they could play the light, and then they could go dark, and it's almost like each of the characters had part of that. So whether it was Kate or Nicola, and obviously George, it's like so especially with the brother, that kind of narrative of the brother, he seems like it, and then it's like actually in graduations it's like maybe he wasn't all we thought he was, or so that was a really great quality I was lucky enough to get with the actors, that they could do two very different things, extremes with the characters.
Sure. I mean, you've touched on this a little bit already, but I'm imagining that the world being the world it is, that you were having to work fast and work hard, just because of budgets and so on. I mean, how much truth is there in that?
A lot. No, it was it was like, I know everyone says this, but we were so lucky. But like the crew, I think it was just everyone was there for the right reasons, and we were all away from home and stuff, so we were all staying there for the duration of the shoot, and everyone was just, it was amazing, like everyone was just so committed. But even then it was, and maybe, day one and stuff, it's like, can we actually do this? Like, you looked at the schedule and you're like, oh my God. So it became like a real point to kind of hit the ground running. So I think like scene one, it was like, it was like, we done it, it was like 5 minutes, like, right, we'll move on to the next scene, and people were like, whoa, this is, they thought, the scene never made the film, it was terrible, but it was that idea to kind of get that energy, because we knew we needed to keep that, and we knew there was some really big scenes that we would need half a day on, and, so it became that, exactly, like that was always the biggest challenge, the schedule, and to get and work in the way that we wanted to work, So.
And George, I mean, practically and emotionally, I mean, it's your film to an extent. I mean, you're in almost every scene. I mean, it must have been a fairly tough schedule.
Yeah, but it's I much prefer being on all the time. It's like it's the best to kind of just be there with everyone and feel a part of it and feel like you're continually moving. You know, not stopping is the best, because otherwise you're kind of just. I mean, that's what you're there to do. So it's like any time in between is times where you kind of it's harder not to be, because you don't really think about it too much when you're doing it. It's the sort of times in between where you're making a conscious effort to be thinking about it or not thinking about it. So, and I guess that immediacy. I mean, the thing of getting to do 10-minute takes and things, but then that's then the scene's done in 15 minutes. It's a really economical way of working and getting to try. You get 10 minutes of doing nothing but what we've got to try and achieve, rather than 2 minutes here, take a break, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. So it was quite economical in the way as well. So and I guess that energy as well, knowing it's a mixture of knowing that you've got a lot of space to muck up, but you've only got this short amount of time to do it. So don't hold back as well.
Sure.
Because that's it.
How supportive was the village and the villagers while you were up there? Because obviously, I mean, sometimes, even with relatively small productions, people arrive in remote locations, and there's a feeling of slight kind of resentment or tension there. But I mean, I can't imagine that. I mean, for Those In Peril, I can't imagine you could have made that film without the village having cooperated, both practically and also just kind of spiritually. I suppose.
No, absolutely. We literally couldn't have made it without them. Even just the local knowledge, and a lot of the people there helped out in every way, behind the scenes, and a lot of them on the kind of crew and obviously in front of the camera in a lot of the scenes as well. So no, we were just so thankful that and even with, because us as filmmakers turn up in these villages and it's like, oh yeah, we're making a film, and then we leave and that, but and it wasn't just even when the novelty wore off to the village, they were still there and they were still so supportive. So after when week 1 became week 2 and it would be, oh god, they're shutting the street or whatever to film this scene, everyone was just amazing, and it was because we were all staying around there as well. It was we obviously got to know a lot of the locals as well, and it was great.
Yeah, Debbie and Bunter, the landlords, we had lunch in the pub every day. Okay. I mean, we had the catering thing, but they let us, the whole cast and crew, sit in their pub and eat lunch. Eating eating someone else's food in their pub as every day.
Sure.
And 40 of us was it was amazing, and they're really, really lovely.
I mean, another of the things about the film which is so striking is that kind of visual element which hits you immediately, which is this sense of the collage almost. There's these fragments of Super 8 and camera phone and this swirl of kind of memory, I guess. Again, was that always your intention right from the beginning? So when you were shooting the film, did you always have that in mind, that you were then presumably going to go into post-production and kind of assemble this thing?
Mm-hmm. I think it was just trying to get it to work in the script, and then, as long as it worked in the script, then it was, especially with the layered stuff, it was about getting as much good options as possible, and then we knew it would be in post that we could move things about and shape things, and leaving yourself open for the nice surprises that are better than anything you could write. It's oh god, that's great, and to allow for that. But yeah, it was. I think it was all scripted. This most of it anyway. Yeah, maybe on the day. But the general thrust, again, it's this is why we're having Super 8 here, or this is why we go with black and white here, and whether it was just trying to create a certain mood, but all that was in the script, and then it was just about trying to create, because I think, to me, that was always important. I do see film as a real sensory thing, and a real, if anything, that, it's to try and how you can connect with an audience emotionally, and you've got the options are infinite, images and sound, and it just becomes a real exciting thing, I think, and I just see, I don't the layers, and I just see that as another tool or part of the palette to kind of help with that, creating these images.
I mean, there's such a kind of incredible texture to the film, and I suppose there's another version of that movie, which is you could make the film as this almost straight social realism, and you've just kind of gone so far away, from that, and yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, it's the sensory element is, I think, what stands out about the film so much. I mean, sound is clearly a very important aspect of filmmaking to you.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of that was, we were trying to be as prepared for that as we could, even in the script, so it was a lot of a lot of the sound was in the script itself, and then of course, the beauty is, you know, when you get into post, that's, which is the same with every film, of course, that's where it gets made, and, you know, but again, we had like archive of sounds and sound effects, and, you know, like hundreds of different options, and it's, what happens if we try this, and just kind of growing this real, and I think especially with the images and the voice stuff, we done a lot of that as well. We done what was in the script, but then we done an hour more, or, you know, and it was, and it just gave this feeling of like, hopefully like a real life, or a real, you know, like this, they really were brothers, or they, rather than, you know, when it's all very tick, and, you know, the record button and shot on 35mm, and they're pretending it's the, you know, and it's like really, it gave it that kind of, hopefully that realness that make people connect with it more.
I mean, George, how much of what Paul had up his sleeve visually, how much of that were you aware of while you were making the film?
Well, I mean, pretty much. Well, I knew all about the kind of different mediums and that, because I mean, it's all scripted, you know. Like,
what's the scene I'm not in?
No.
Waves.
Like, no, I mean, I mean, it's all, you know, it's all laid out very obviously. There's, as Paul said, I imagine there's lots of surprises in post and stuff, but it's all very intricately planned out, and it's not to be taken for granted, you know. Kind of the journey of the visual elements, and I could get a better understanding of that having watched Paul's short film. So it almost makes me go. It sounds like talking about trousers, shorts. But having seen, obviously, when you read it, you know, it's a sentence saying, you know, there's a hooded figure on a cliff top, cut to colour superative, you know, children running along the sand, and so that's taking you 10 seconds to read that. So you go, right, that's going to be 10 seconds of footage of da. And so, but when you see Paul's short films, you realise that it's almost subliminal, and so that kind of gave me a better understanding of having seen the work before, of kind of what it would be, because when I very first read it, I was thinking it would be a lot more gradual, and didn't get the subliminal element until I saw, you know, Believe in the River Runs. So.
Tell me a little bit about the editing process, Paul, because I understand you brought Anders Refn, who's this kind of very venerated figure in European filmmaking, Danish filmmaking, on board. I mean, why did you bring him in?
I think, well, he's a great editor, but also it was like the first feature for, you know, a lot of us, a lot of the heads of departments, and Michael Oglin, who was the main editor, it was a kind of condition almost. It's like, all right, but, you know, so it's, you know, it's one thing, all us, yeah, we're making our first film, but I think especially with the edit, they knew, and it was great having Anders coming in, and, you know, like, but even then he looked at a cut when it was pretty advanced, and I think, you know, he was impressed with the work Michael did, because he's amazing, I think, Michael as an editor. So yeah, like, we were, like George was saying, the way we were working, we were kind of dumping however much footage on Michael every day, and it was almost more documentary, like, I'd imagine, you know. It was whatever 60, 70 hours of footage, and then it was like, all right, how, you know, and it was this kind of, and I think because Michael had cut a couple of my shorts as well, so I knew he not only did he get what I was trying to do, he was far better, you know, he could take it to a whole other level, and like these moments like that he could pull out, some of them even surprised me, and, you know, by putting them side to side and creating something new, and it was, for me again, like, just seeing what he done with it to take it to that other level was amazing, and yeah, and I think Michael had worked with Anders on a previous film, so they had a relationship, so it felt right just to have, you know, fresh eyes to come in, and, you know, a few Anders' suggestions were great, and, you know, just even one or two things that just, yeah, really, really helped us see the film afresh and stuff, so yeah, it worked good.
I'm going to do one more question, and I'm going to throw it open to the audience, really, which is, to what extent you've been surprised and pleased, relieved, freaked out by the response to the film? Because I mean, a film like this is it's almost unique, and actually, I suppose there's no way of knowing. You must have been slightly trepidatious as to how this was going to be received, and in fact, it's been received incredibly well. Both the film and George individually are up for BAFTAs on the weekend. There are sort of tuxes in the offing. Yeah. Were you anticipating any of that, or were you nerve-wracked when the film actually kind of came out?
No, I think it was. We went for it, you know. It was that idea that, for me anyway, it was my first film, but there was no guarantee, you know, and it still may be my last. So it's like, let's go for it, you know. And I think the whole crew had that kind of feeling. So what we were trying to do, it was like, let's really do that rather than, you know, making lots of compromises all the way. So, and that, you know, with Warp and with the financiers and the crew and everyone just kind of going, let's do that. Like this, we're excited about that. And I think it was like, which was quite fearful, of course, but it was clear that it could all go horribly wrong at any moment. You know, not, you know, but just almost the way we were making that film and what we were trying to achieve with it. But I think for me, like, it was always, like, I knew it was never going to be a film that was for everyone, but it was always really important to me that those that liked it or connected with it really connected with it. You know, it wasn't just another, you know, it wasn't like you could watch 3 films back to back and that was just one of them. It's like, all right, you know, so that was always the hope that, that those that had a connection with it, it was quite an intense connection. Yeah, so it's been amazing that that's been the case, that some people have connected that way with it. Yeah.
How about you, George? Because obviously, I mean, I guess as an actor, any actor, you have a different experience because, you know, you do your work on set, and then most of the time, you know, the film will then disappear off into edit, and then at some stage, a few months, possibly a year later, you know, you'll see the film, and then you'll have this response. So how's it been for you?
I mean, the response. Like, it's you know, it's wonderful. It's like it's just lovely. It's something that, I mean, for me, it was such a wonderful experience making it, and I learned so much, and it changed my view on so much, and you know, changed my way of thinking, and I'm just so, you know, thankful to be involved. So it's lovely that you know, it's been received well by the people, and I think it's such a, you know, all the, as Paul was just saying, I mean, the kind of attitude behind making it is bang on. So it's lovely that that's gone with a great reaction.
Perfect. Now, I'm wondering if there's questions from the floor here. Or is everyone still stunned by the ending? Question here.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, thank you very much, both of you. A really tremendous film, very, very moving, and I was overwhelmed with it. So, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment and a question. You sort of followed the lead character all the way through and become completely absorbed in this, you know, trauma and experience. But at one remove, it seems as much about the village, or, you know, the fishing village, as it is about him, or they're there and they're important. And I wondered if you'd gone back to the village and shown it to people, because it's quite a damning sort of portrait of a village as well. You know, as you see the character sort of crumbling, you know, you see that sort of calcified, you know, harshness of the villagers in their treatment of him.
Yeah, no, we showed it at the village, and and someone else said, you know, they were all very aware of it. It was like, you know, it was certainly never the intention. Like, that's, you know, it's like I say, I grew up in such a event. To me, they're the best people in the world, and certainly, you know, it was the exact opposite. How accommodating they all were to us as a film crew. So it wasn't like we were it was, I think, what was the idea with the film, like one of the big starting places was to have, you know, a close-knit community. But what happens when, you know, one person goes the extreme opposite? You know, if like this tragedy has happened and you know, the village en masse are kind of dealing with it in this way, and then to have, you know, one person that goes the exact opposite way, and that's where the conflict comes from that. So it was, that was the idea with that.
Hi again. Yeah, thank you very much for that. It was really quite an afternoon. I was just going to ask, really, you mentioned Ken Loach, I think, with respect to your casting director. It made me think quite strongly of Lynn Ramsey and her brand of social realism, especially with the kind of hints and flecks of magical realism kind of creeping in there. And I wondered whether you could talk a little bit about that and where you saw yourself kind of not fitting in, I guess, but moving on and building on those ideas and those giant figures, really.
Crikey, Ken who? No, I think it's as a as a lover of film, I think it's always about seeing that being shaky. When you see something and you're, I've never seen that before, and certainly with Ken and Lynn's films, they've had that effect on me, and there's dozens of other filmmakers that are similar, and it's just that it was kind of what I was saying earlier with Danny, like the idea that we can like, if anything, that's for me as a filmmaker, it is about that. It's just that the potential is infinite, and if it's just how you can do that, but then keep the audience with you, because of course you could kind of go an extreme version, and then you just you alienate the audience. So that's always been that's always been kind of what I've tried to do, to have a intense sensory experience, but also an emotional, and not being shy of that, like not shying away from whether it's saying something or trying to show beauty or show love, or so that was, I don't know if that totally answered your question, but yeah.
I mean, something else I was curious about was, some of the individual images in the film are so startling. I mean, the one which, for some reason, stuck with me above all else was George walking through the children's parade.
Right, yeah.
And I'm wondering to what extent that came about when you were piecing together the story and piecing together the narrative, and that image then pops up, or whether, because that image is so striking, and there are others in the film, obviously, which just leap out at you, whether it was a question of finding the image first and then fitting it into the narrative.
I think it was, it possibly, once the idea was there, rather than starting to write it from scene one, it was almost association, and it was all these potential things, and because and again, where I grew up in the village, there's a similar gala every summer, and all the kids dress up as kids, and it was just that kind of, that might be interesting if someone which is, I guess, was always a kind of thread of the film, that when, as George is a child, and hence the brothers footage, that was a different place where he did believe these things, and he felt at peace, and so it was just putting him in that context, small children and George on a parade, and and it just kind of clicked, and it was like that. Yeah, so that probably was one of the dozen starting images, and that could be interesting.
Sure. I mean, it's a testament to the film, because it doesn't feel like, for all the power of those images, it doesn't feel like you've just arranged these different startling images in some sort of weird order. Actually, everything does feel very kind of, terrible word, but everything feels very organic, it's there for a reason. Yeah. I think we had questions from, there's another question, then maybe we've had a few questions from Twitter and Facebook and so on as well. So.
I just had a question around the use of colour in the film. I felt like colour was also a character. We had mainly blues and muted tones, and then the most striking colour coming through was red. Was that really timed? The idea of when those flashes of colour outside, was that something you consciously timed along the narrative of the film? Or?
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, to a certain, I'm sure, I could take credit for stuff that probably were accidents, and it's they got but for sure, especially, we kind of discussed, with the cinematographer, the kind of palette we were going in, and the slightly different shifts throughout the film as well, and then the idea that this, as the darkness kind of descends, so the red of it, knowing the ending was coming, it was about kind of foreshadowing to a certain degree that happening. Yeah, so it was thought through. But I'm always conscious with these things that sometimes you can't get more credit than
Just take the credit.
I'll take the credit. Yeah. But no, it was something we discussed and we thought of. Yeah.
Questions from. I think we had some questions from social media.
It's a question from Tom on Facebook, and he says that it feels like a truly Scottish film. And he says, now that the film has been screened internationally over the past year, do you feel the audiences react differently depending on where it's screened?
with certain elements, perhaps, but I think again, it was always, like it was always the hope that the themes would travel. Like I think it's the big themes of the film are something that everyone can relate to. Hopefully, so that was always the intention. But but we never shied away from the Scottishness of it. It wasn't about like cleaning up all the act or anything like that, or like this kind of weird. So no, I was in Britain. That's that's my country and the country I love. So it became a. The different, like, what would the main? I'm struggling to think of any major difference, but perhaps maybe just how certain things are read and certain like because it was always the idea with the film to leave certain parts open to the audience and that and. It's so maybe that's interesting, but I don't know if that's country to country. I could kind of pinpoint that.
It is really interesting. It's an interesting idea, though, isn't it? Because it does feel very to the core Scottish, and it doesn't feel like the kind of Scottish film which is made for the English to kind of to look at and say, God, look how quaint the Scots are. It feels like a proper Scottish film, but at the same time, because it's about this fishing community, you think, well, actually, maybe could you make the same film in Cornwall? I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Yeah.
No, I think it was a bit. It was embracing how Scottish it was, but at the same time, it could be set, in in something a lot of people say that even Scandinavia and stuff, which it felt, which is perhaps again coming from some of my favourite directors, being from Scandinavia. These kind of things, like certain influences in it that it perhaps had a tie with that as well, with the Scandinavian film, and also, and there was a lot of Scandinavian crew on it also, of Michael and Anders, but the composer and the sound designer, they were Swedish, and it was interesting.
The thing is, it's funny though, because obviously from an English perspective, a very English perspective, it always feels like you get beyond a certain point in Scotland, and it kind of becomes you've got more of an affinity with Iceland or Norway or Sweden, Denmark than you do with London.
No, that's right. And that's, I guess, politically, that's all going on now as well. Like that. Yeah. It's an interesting time. So.
Anything else from Twitter or Facebook?
Loads.
Okay. Yeah. Can we just wait for the mic? Thank you.
Did you start off with a particular message? Was there anything that bugged you that you wanted the audience to think about, like something that you wanted to change in, I don't know, society or the way people are? Like, was there something that made you think, I need to tell this story?
God, that's it. I think part of it was we were always really clear, like that it was, at its core it was just like a really simple love story between the two brothers. Like that he really missed his brother, and obviously it goes in very strange places with that, but that was always key. Like it was the heart of the piece was always important. That it was. So I like that's not some great message, but at the same, I think it was more about going somewhere that kind of scared me. Is like the what is it, Cassavetes that says that rather than making a film about something you do know, it's like going something that you don't or you're interested in, and somewhere along the way, that journey, maybe you learn a bit more about that. And I think, like with something like that, with grief, and it is mysterious and it's different for different people and all that. But I think there was something about like really going quite into some depth with that, rather than it being almost like a plot device, like he's in grief, let's move on and get on with the film. It was, whereas that became like the driving thing, and like that's something that we always discussed. Like I said, like the love and obviously the relationship with the mother and stuff. That was always important. And, so message-wise, like I don't know, like that's it's tough, but like even it was trying to like these connections felt. By isolating Aaron, George so much, it felt like these little connections with the mother, with Jane, with the brother were all the stronger, and so like that. So the message, I guess, is there's always you're not alone, or like that. God, at least this isn't live. You'll be able to edit that out. But it's
Okay, have we got any more questions? Guys, I'm going to ask one more question, which is about the ending. I mean, we talked a little bit before we came on about the fact the ending is a little bit divisive, and certainly people, have quite strong reactions to the ending. I mean, was there ever a moment where there was a different ending in your mind, or was this from the word go? I mean, did you? Because some storytellers, whether they're working on film or on the page, whatever it is, they'll start with the ending and then construct everything towards that. Mm-hmm. Was that the case For Those in Peril, or was this something where you got a certain way with the narrative and you think, and then it became obvious that this was how it had to end?
I think it was there very early. Like you said before I'd started writing the draft. It's and that's how, and I think that felt key because it became something that it needed to be earned throughout the film, and because you can't just throw a scene like that in willy nilly, and it was it's been really interesting having two people sitting next to each other watching the film and reading the ending totally different ways, and I think that's a great thing. I was always deliberate to leave that open enough that people can invest a bit of themselves into the film in general, hopefully, and especially with the ending. That was always going to be. But yeah, for sure, some people it's yeah. Again, it became that. It felt like, although. It felt like it was almost the only way to end the film, to have it all kind of click together there, and yeah.
I think we're going to leave it there. I just want to thank George MacKay and Paul Wright for joining us. I think For Those in Peril is an extraordinary film, so I hope here today that everyone's enjoyed it, and I hope people watching Beyond will, if they haven't seen the film already, will seek it out. It's a very special